Come on now, rock with me. Come on now, rock. Yeah.
And what's up? Welcome into the Yinzer Crazy Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are brought to you by Steel City Wheelhouse, where the bar is set. Make sure and check them out at www.steelcitywheelhouse.com or head on over to Imperial, PA to give them a visit. I'm so happy that you spent some of your day checking us out. We are recapping week 1 of Steelers free agency on the podcast today, and that includes, yes, Corvette. JuJu Smith-Schuster is back in black and gold. Does that mean Steven Nelson is potentially on his way out? And what is a Miles Killebrew exactly? Sounds delicious and full of hops, and it might be coming to a local pub near you on tap, or coming to Heinz Field this fall. These topics and more, of course, and we'll be joined by a distinguished guest today. He is, in my mind, quite literally the greatest sports writer of our generation. He's a current NBC Sports contributor for Pro Football Talk, Football Night in America, the man that literally wears the crown. Peter King will join me to break down all Steelers things in just minutes. I am Mike Nicastro. You can follow me on Twitter at MikedUpSports1 or over at Yinzer Crazy Show. And I want to tell you guys all about YinzerCrazy.com. All right, make sure you bookmark it on your damn homepage already. If you love Pittsburgh sports, mixed with original content, combined with some breaking news, and of course, this, the number one podcast for sports in the Steel City, do us a favor and come hang out with us on a regular basis. We also air our show Yinzer Hour every Thursday at 6 p.m., which live streams to our Twitter account that I just mentioned at Yinzer Crazy Show. Last week we had on former Steelers defensive back and co-captain Lee Flowers. The week before that we talked to two-time Super Bowl champion, one of Ben Roethlisberger's protectors, as they say, Trey Essex. You never know what we might unwrap on the show. We're always bringing some fun stuff to you on both, of course, this podcast and the Yinzer Hour, Thursdays at 6 p.m. on our Twitter account. As for this show right here, man, let's get to it. The King has returned. That is an ode to my man Simba. I know that you are some Disney fans out there like myself that will get that. And I also know that you didn't come here to listen to me blabber. You came in to check in with a guy who has 1.8 million Twitter followers, which means that we are currently just 1.7 million and 996,000 away from catching him. We'll get there. He is a living legend, doesn't need any introduction, but I'm going to give him a good one. It's Peter King on the Yinzer Crazy Podcast. And he has covered the NFL for nearly 4 decades. You can, of course, read his Football Morning in America column Mondays on NBCSports.com, as well as watch and listen to him weekly on various NBC Sports platforms. There is no one better in the business than the one and only Peter King. Peter, happy Monday. How are you?
Wow, that's quite an introduction. Thank you. I'm doing well, and thanks for having me on the pod.
Peter, we're about 40 episodes in, and we now officially have our first reoccurring guest. For you, in terms of career accolades, it's got to be right up there with like an Emmy Award, right?
Hey, listen, I'm an honorary Yinzer because I married a girl from Dormont, and I'm a big fan of all things Pittsburgh, and so it's really good to be on.
Well, we're obviously a huge fan of you as well, and our listeners are excited to get your take on the Steelers. Before we do that, I got to ask you really quickly, do you have a bracket, and is it also engulfed in flames?
Yeah, it's ruined because whenever I do these brackets, first of all, I know nothing about college basketball. Absolutely nothing. I don't watch it. So I know nothing. So a friend of mine named Pete Thamel, who I used to work with at Sports Illustrated, now works for Yahoo, and he covers college sports. So every year for my bracket, I just text him and I say, hey, give me 5 teams to really like, and give me a bunch of teams, a high seeds who are going to lose. So I just do what he tells me. And this year he told me, oh man, I love Illinois. You got to go with Illinois. His 2 teams are Illinois and Florida State. So Illinois is out. I expect Florida State to lose by 40 very soon. But hey, it's all fun, and it only costs $20 which is a small price to flush down the toilet for such a lot of great fun.
Well, no question about it. I think you, along with the rest of the world bracket, is currently engulfed in flames. So nothing to feel bad about there. Hey, some would say the Steelers are burning in flames in this area. That might be a bit exaggerated. I watched you on Football Morning in America. I watched you on Mike Florio's Pro Football Talk about a week ago, prior to free agency, Peter. And you said the Steelers have a championship defense, but everyone in that division is getting better. If everything goes right, the Steelers could be a Super Bowl team. We're a week into free agency. Where are you on the if everything goes right scale?
Well, I mean, I really hope for their sake that they don't lose Steven Nelson. Because every year, it seems to me, the Steelers try to rebuild their secondary, and they're not successful very often. And they've gone down the road with a bunch of Senquez Golsons, and guys who just didn't really work out. And now, the last 2 years, the corner who's played the most in that secondary is Steven Nelson, and he's played well. He's not a top 5 NFL corner. He's an above-average NFL corner and a good player for that defense. And to me, if I were the Steelers, I'd rather have him on my team next year than JuJu Smith-Schuster. So if JuJu's contract ends up basically sending Steven Nelson out of town, that to me is not a very good trade. Now, look, I like JuJu too, who doesn't? But I just think in terms of need, there's more of a need in the secondary than there is at receiver. Overall, I would hope that Ben Roethlisberger spends a good chunk of this offseason, determined to, figuring that it's probably his last year, and determined to come in and have a great year. Part of that would be to have a great off year and to come in great shape, 20 pounds lighter, whatever it is. I mean, at the end of the season, I said, why bring Roethlisberger back, really? And you don't want to overreact to, especially the last game, you don't want to overreact, but you also don't want to say, well, I'm positive Ben's going to be great again. I mean, I don't know how you could be positive. Now, having said all that, I think that if Roethlisberger is healthy for the year and he is in better shape, has a little bit more escapability, and if Deontay Johnson can catch the ball once in a while, I think that the Steelers still can make a run. Those are some big ifs, but if those things go right, they're going to be in the ball game in December.
We are chatting with the legendary Peter King here on the Yinzer Crazy podcast, talking Steelers, of course. And Peter, one thing that you and many others have been adamant about is for the Steelers to be successful, they're going to have to find a dynamic running back. You said they haven't had one since Le'Veon Bell. Is the draft the most logical spot for them to find that player?
They have got to investigate that area to try to get better there. But look, I've maintained over the last 10, 15 years that I would much rather have, a pedestrian 5th round running back with some ability. And I would also like to be able to get in this draft, if I were them, I'd like to really address the offensive line, because it was very clear last year that it wasn't all the fault of guys like Connor and Snell and their young backs. And so, I think they probably are going to try to take a running back with some tools, but if I were them, I would be as concerned or more so with improving the guys up front.
I want to transition back to free agency a little bit. I thought you had a really interesting nugget today in your Football Morning in America article when you referenced the figures by over the cap. The teams that spent the most from 2017 to 2020, and you had in order Jags, Jets, Bills, Lions, Browns. You then had their winning percentage is right around 39% combined. Obviously, the Browns and Bills are ascending, Peter, but we get so much, we hear so much around Pittsburgh about, Steelers aren't signing anybody. There's no money being spent out. But I look at that and say, I think we're doing just fine here if we're not in the category of those teams. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that this, for so many reasons, is one of the, I don't want to say it's one of the worst times of the year because everybody gets excited about all these guys who are signed. But just look at history. Mm-hmm. I mean, probably in the last 10 years, it was 10 years ago, the Philadelphia Eagles signed what was called in 2011 their dream team. And they had one of the biggest free agency signing periods ever that any team has ever had. And they went out that year, went 8-8. They went 4-12 the next year, and Andy Reid got whacked. And so, and look, the road is littered with stories almost exactly like that. And so, my feeling is, if you look at who really spends the most money in free agency traditionally, almost always teams and fan bases are disillusioned, disappointed, angry because it doesn't translate into wins the next year. Look at the Jets with Le'Veon and C.J. Mosley. There's two players. They spent $135 million on those guys. Bell's gone. Mosley, it's been 2 years. He's played 121 snaps. He's hardly given them anything. And so I just think that you are much better off unless you're like the Patriots. You have a standard that you want to live up to, and you have $69 million. And this is important too, the two guys who they signed, they're two tight ends who they signed for legitimate money, Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. You could argue that those are two of the top 5 or 6 tight ends in football. So if you have a chance to get those guys at age, whatever, I think 26 or 27, I think that is a wise use of your money. But the problem is the guys who you are signing are usually not young players with 4, 5, 6, 7 really good years in front of them. And so that's when teams get diluted and when they start spending money the wrong way. So I never ever will criticize a team for not spending on the opening few days of free agency.
Well, it's important to hear that, Steeler fans. Just because we are not shelling out $70 million like the Patriots does not necessarily mean the sky is falling, and that's in part because this is always how the Steelers have done it, right? And it's a good transition once more to I want to ask you about this upcoming Hall of Fame class, because obviously you're a voter and you're somebody that has been very involved in the process. And speaking of consistency and maintaining a franchise that is built through the draft, obviously you're going to have some Steelers this year inducted the traditional way. Troy Polamalu, Alan Faneca, who you've been on record noting that both are very deserving. Head coach Bill Cowher as well, and Donnie Shell will be inducted via the Centennial class. I think for Cowher and Shell, Peter, is it fair to say that you weren't exactly pounding the table for them?
Well, let me just say this. I was not a member of the Centennial voting block. Mm-hmm. Okay, there was, I think, 25 voters for the Centennial class. And just so that people understand what the Centennial class is, the Centennial class was adopted to, it was really kind of the brainchild of Rick Gosselin, who's the voter representing Dallas on the committee. And he, to me, I've been doing it 29 years. He's the best voter, works the hardest, has got the best conscience of any voter I've ever been in that room with. And he came up with this idea to, with the 100th anniversary or 100th year of the NFL, why doesn't the Hall of Fame have a special class in which he informally called it a cleanup class? So all of the old timers who hadn't gotten in over the years, but who had really, really good and strong cases, that they would, we'd hear their cases and they would get in. So what happened is that the Hall engaged some people on the committee and also some others in the wider football world. Bill Belichick, I know, was one of the voters for the Centennial class. I was not. And so, in my opinion, the Centennial class should have been full of coaches and former players from bygone eras, and it wasn't nearly as much as I thought it should be. And I mean, the one example that I think of is a guy like Buddy Parker, who's a coach for the Lions and the Steelers in the 50s and 60s. He basically went to Pittsburgh late 50s, very early 60s, I forget, and he turned them around so that they weren't a championship team, but they weren't 2-12 anymore either. And he got them some winning seasons, kind of turned them around, then they fell flat again, and then Noel came in 69. But he's also the guy who won 2 championships in Detroit. And for a while in the 50s, when Paul Brown was the best coach in football, he beat Brown, not consistently, but beat him in both championship games that the Lions won. Anyway, those were the guys who, in my opinion, should have been recognized and should have been picked in the Centennial class. Now, look, I'm never going to be one of those people who say, oh, he doesn't deserve to be in. If you're in, you're voted in, congratulations, good job. I may disagree with the fact that person is in, but once somebody is in the Hall of Fame, they're a Hall of Famer. Congratulations, and let's all move on. My only issue with the Centennial class is that there were some players and coaches elected in that process that are going to very much influence future Hall of Fame classes. If you look at Bill Cowher's resume, there's 4 or 5 coaches who immediately you say, well, if Cowher's in, then this guy has to be in. Right. You look at Mike Shanahan and Mike Holmgren, and there's quite a few. There's Tom Coughlin. And so, look, that is the reality of what the Centennial class and the election of some of the people who got in, that's the reality of what it means now. And so, look, I mean, I congratulate everybody who got in, but it's just it changed the bar. As to what you need to do, both as a player and a coach, to get in the Hall of Fame.
No question about it. And Donnie Shell's induction will be the 10th Steelers player from those 70s teams that obviously won 4 Super Bowls. We're rounding out with Peter King here on the Yinzer Crazy podcast. Peter, before we let you go, we asked you last time, you gave us some incredible Steelers training camp stories. You mentioned you're a Yinzer by marriage, so you are an honorary Yinzer, of course. Do you have any particular training camp story that stands out from those 4 guys that we just talked about? A Bill Cowher or Troy Polamalu story?
The Bill Cowher story is one of my favorites ever in Latrobe. There was, and I don't even know if it still exists this way, because this is the only time I ever saw it. Mm-hmm. It had rained torrentially for quite a while one night in western Pennsylvania, and so the Steelers came in the next day that morning, and they said, we cannot practice on these fields. So what they did is, in Latrobe, up from the fields, and up behind the dormitories there are some what almost honestly look to be just cornfields. Basically, they're not cornfields, but they're just open. It's just open land. Mm-hmm. And so I remember covering the Steelers one summer, and so they were out there one morning on this field, kind of doing a walkthrough, and I just thought, I've never seen anything in my life that looked more like Field of Dreams in football than this, because you could just look out, and there are, here's the Pittsburgh Steelers, this storied franchise, with guys practicing on a field that, in all sincerity, there had to have been holes, divots, and everything, but it was what they had to do that particular day because the other fields were unpracticable, unusable. So I always thought that was really I've always really loved the teams that go away to training camp, because I think there are a lot of really good things about it, for things like camaraderie, togetherness, and building a real team. You hear that now out of the NCAA, that these teams that are just, they don't have anything to do other than sit around their hotels in Indianapolis, because the players can't go anywhere, the coaches can't go anywhere. So, they're building these bonds that, they're always going to have, and that to me, I think that really is a cool thing to do for a football team too, to go away to training camp. Not enough teams do it anymore, but I think the Rooneys and Mike Tomlin, they still see the benefit for doing that, and that day in Pittsburgh was one I'm sure that all the guys on that Steeler team and Bill Cowher will always remember, is maybe the practice field that's most like Pop Warner 8th grade team that they had been on in years.
Incredible. I'm over here visualizing like Levon Kirkland slipping on an ear of corn or something. And my goodness.
He's a big dude, and I'm sure he would have slipped. But yeah, that was a memorable day.
The damage it would have done to the corn, I'm sure, would have been much more significant. Hey, do not rely on him for bracket advice. But of course, if you need your NFL scoop, there's nobody better in the world. Peter King, thank you so much for doing it, man. Always such a pleasure.
Hey, really, my pleasure. Have a great day, great week, and good luck to the Steelers.
That is, of course, awesome sauce. I sit over here and pinch myself countless times during that interview, as I can't believe I get to do this for a living. And the second time that we've had Peter King on the podcast, just it gets better and better, man, every day. Thanks so much for checking us out and checking out this podcast. If it's the first time you're able to join us over here at the Yids Are Crazy podcast, we hope to be a weekly staple in terms of your routine. Hey, I want to shout out a couple of people. I want to shout out Cody Coleman over at Back to the Berg. He had me on as a guest to discuss my baby, Yids Are Crazy. You could find that over on his YouTube page. Just search Back to the Berg, and it'll help you find out where the hell I came from, along with my co-founder, Jordan York. And I always want to shout him out as well. He couldn't join us today because he's busy working on a new track, aptly titled Yids Are Crazy. Yeah, you heard it. You heard it here first. Coming to a dance club near you. You're going to hear it at Diesel, maybe even Tequila Cowboy. It's catchy. It's a good song. It's made for the people, by the people of Pittsburgh. Jordan York music, baby. Check it out. Can't wait for you to see that. And some other things to look forward to on the site this week over at yinzarcrazy.com. We just had a piece on Justin Lane today. If you're unfamiliar with Lane, he's a cornerback in his third year for the Steelers that we're hoping and anticipating will take the next step. He really needs to take a Cam Sutton-like leap if he wants a second payday with Pittsburgh, and it would certainly behoove the Steelers as well to have Due to was a third-round pick, they invested some pretty serious capital in, finally demonstrate what he is capable of. Our guy Griffin was able to write that up, so go check it out on the site. And I do want to mention tomorrow, Buccos coverage, baby. David Stagen has a comprehensive Pirates spring training recap for Yins. We are somehow now just a couple of weeks away from first pitch on opening day. We got Todd Frazier, the Todd Father. We have the knuckleballer Stephen Wright now somehow on this Pirates roster. Ben Cherington is building a 2014 All-Star team before your eyes. It's strange, but I'm kind of enjoying it. I cannot lie. And you know what? With baseball right around the corner, I'm happy to officially announce, yes, on this episode, that next week's podcast will be dedicated exclusively to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Whether you like it or not, there is a cannonball coming right to the Yins Are Crazy podcast. Our next guest, and I'll give you a few pauses to predict who it is, so you can have some fun at home. Turn to a friend, turn us up, and say, all right, listen, who could this be? All right, your first hint, he is a former player. Any guesses? Yeah, that's pretty broad. That could be a lot of names for sure. This next one could easily give it away if you got the creative juices working. He has the nickname of a popular WWE wrestler turned actor. Maybe in Jumanji. Do-do-doom. Do-do-doom. All right, you have to know now. If you don't, he hit the last home run ever at Three Rivers Stadium, and he's currently a Pirates broadcaster for AT&T Sports Pittsburgh. There is not a man who epitomizes the city of Pittsburgh more than John Wayner. The Rock. He will be breaking down your 2021 Pirates in only the way he can right here next week on the Yins Are Crazy podcast. All right. Yippee-ki-yay. I'm going to go watch my bracket, continue to absolutely be burnt into flames. I don't think I've had a decent bracket since like 2006 when Steph Curry and Davidson made their run to the Elite Eight that ended in Kansas winning the championship. I think. Don't quote me on that. But regardless, it's been that long. I'm there with Peter King. I'm going to blame it on Pete Thamel, also of Yahoo Sports, steering us in the wrong direction. But I tell you what, it's been pandemonium. If you're an NCAA tournament fan like myself, it certainly has still been a joy to watch. It's like jumping on Steelers Twitter every day, pretty much. It's just a burning pit, similar to my brackets. Pun intended there. Yeah, we'll go with it with the pit pun. All right, guys. For Peter King, the one and only, of course, Jordan York, and all of you crazy Yinzers, I'm Mike Nicastro signing off. Follow me on Twitter, please, at MikeDubSports1. And give us a follow at Yins Are Crazy Show. Make sure to check out the website, yinsarecrazy.com. And check out Steel City Wheelhouse as well. They're on Instagram. We're on Instagram. Social media. You got to love it. I will see you Thursday night for Yinzer Hour at 6 p.m. on our Twitter timeline. And then make sure you stay tuned and look out for that Buccos special next week on this podcast. All right, guys. Peace, love, and pierogies. Yin stay crazy.
The city will be mine, Pittsburgh, she mine. Every block and bus line, embrace the city. I can taste the city. Philly ain't the same, can copy and paste the city. Shout out to Henry Hines, you went and made the city. If y'all from this city, come on now, rock with me. It ain't J-Wise flow without tight rhymes. It ain't a Pittsburgher without the fries. From the nation's heartland like mom's apple pies. It's pure Americana, Hines on your fries. It ain't J-Wise flow without tight rhymes. It ain't a Pittsburgher without the fries. From the nation's heartland like mom's apple pies. It's pure Americana, Hines on your fries.